Hello and welcome to episode 2 of 10 Minute Music Ed, the music ed edition of 10 Minute Band. My name is Clara Galbraith and I am going into my senior year studying music education at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. In this episode we will be talking about social emotional learning and also just a tiny bit about the teenage brain. First of all, what is social emotional learning? Also sometimes called SEL because the world of education has a lot of acronyms. The North Carolina Department of Public Instruction defines social emotional learning as a strengths-based developmental process that begins at birth and evolves across the lifespan. It is the process through which children, adolescents, and adults learn skills to support healthy development and relationships. Why do we care about this? Well, I would argue that teaching a student how to be a human being and showing them healthy ways to process emotions and social interactions is just good practice. Some people might argue I'm a teacher, not their parent. But in my opinion, again, there's the old saying that always says it takes a village to raise a child. And as a teacher, you're a very important part of that village and that ecosystem. And you're most likely a very important and trusted adult that these students see in their lives pretty much every day. And if you're teaching something like high school band, you're also going to see them for up to 4 years in a row, maybe even more, depending on if you work with the middle school band or not. All that being said, if there are serious issues that come up, such as depression, eating disorders, self-harm, or harm a student is doing or planning to do to others, you as their teacher are not responsible for that. What you are responsible for is getting them the right help. This is very important. Make sure you do this. If you're unsure about how serious a problem is, talk to the proper counselor or administrator at your school to make sure the student gets the help they need. They always told us this as students, but it applies to teaching as well. If you're unsure, it's better to check and to give people the resources that they may need, even if it turns out they don't need them. It's better to do that than to not do anything. But you, as their band director, are not responsible for helping the student take care of their mental illness. You need to help them find someone who's specially trained in that, because it's not fair to you or the student. There are, however, some ways to make sure your classroom is a comfortable and safe space to learn, and you can provide knowledge of navigating emotions in social situations just as a trusted adult. I was observing 8th grade band not long ago, and during the teacher's announcements, she said, "Our last band concert is next week." And so the 8th graders in this school, the 8th graders are soon moving up to high school and moving out of middle school. So most of the students cheered when the director said our last band concert is next week, but a lot of them also seemed a little bit confused about what to do. And one student specifically went, "Yay! Wait, are we supposed to be excited or sad about that?" And the teacher replied, "Can it be both? I think it can be both." And the student sat there and thought about it for a moment. And then he agreed that, yeah, it could be both. And kind of just processing that it's okay to feel more than one emotion at once, and they can be kind of contrasting emotions. Kind of like a moment right outside of the movie Inside Out, if anyone's seen that. So then, since it's 8th grade, they all start trying to combine saying yay and aw. So they're like, yay, aw, and then it started sounding like they were trying to do donkey impressions and go like hee haw, just the way they were doing it, which was very funny. But it was also a very sweet and touching moment, seeing them kind of come to this realization that, oh, I can be happy, like excited, and I can be sad at the same time. And I'm very excited I got to witness this. I think sometimes as adults it can be easy to forget how big problems seemed when we were kids, because we now have the knowledge to overcome a lot of those things. And the knowledge that life happens, and just the experience to kind of do that processing of multiple emotions at once. We're also a lot of times worried about big things like paying rent and finding a job, and if you're going to need to move across the country. So sometimes the problems that students face, such as if they're fighting with a friend because they scored better on an AP exam and their friend is jealous, or if they're worrying what to wear to prom, those things to us don't seem significant anymore. They seem really insignificant because we have other things to worry about. But for the students, they are really important and can be really stressful. Something I've heard many different music educators say is that students' problems are big to the students. And just remembering that that is what they're going through, and those issues are a big deal to them, and that matters, because telling a student that their fears are misplaced and that it's not a big deal or it's nothing compared to the fears of the real world doesn't usually help them. It can occasionally, depending on the student and the situation, but I think a lot of times, at least I found when I was going through that age, it just makes students more anxious about graduating from high school and going into the real world when all these adults are constantly telling them like, oh, this is nothing. If they're stressed about that already, and adults telling them it's so much worse in the real world, they're going to be absolutely terrified of graduating and going into the quote-unquote real world and growing up. If you're curious to learn more about social emotional learning, specifically in the realm of music education, I would suggest looking up Scott N. Edgar. He's got a great NAFME article about it. Let's briefly talk just a little bit of science. I think most people know that, or have heard, that the brain is not fully developed until you're about 25 years old, or mid to late 20s, which means your students still have a long way to go. Even if they are 18, they've got 7 more years or so. So that's a long time considering their lifespan and how old they are. So I think it's important just to remember that and be patient with them, because young adulthood is a very trying time of life. You can still enforce and have high expectations in your classroom. I'm not saying throw those out the window. Just if you get frustrated with individuals, remember they still have a lot of growing up to do. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, brain development is related to social experiences during adolescence, which is really interesting how connected it is. A lot of people just assume like, oh, it's because they have no sense of risk or fear, like it's lowered, but there's also some other connections to social experiences. And the National Institute of Mental Health also reminds us that these social experiences are not all bad. So essentially, we shouldn't be viewing students from a deficit model, even if like, oh, their brain isn't fully developed. They still have a lot going for them, and some of the ways the brain chemistry is at that time of life can actually help them and guide them into positive outcomes, such as joining a new club or sport. Hint, hint, this could be banned. Um, Essentially, if we accept the role, like as teachers, we accept the role as a role model to demonstrate healthy social interactions and emotions, we can help guide our students to be more happy and resilient individuals. And of course, we aren't the only ones who do this, but we can be one adult in their lives that show them that you can be both excited and sad about something at the same time. Any of the resources I've quoted will be in the description of the video. Also, for more information on social emotional learning, there's a lot of information through NAFME and state music education associations. There's also like official trainings if you get really interested in it. And there's also a lot of research on social emotional learning just broadly in the field of education. And a lot of that can be applicable to a music class, especially since we get to see students for multiple years in a row. And we get to know them better than a lot of their teachers, I think, since we see them so much. Thank you so much for listening, and take care.